Welcome back to Game Retail Ramblings. This is episode 11, How to Open a Game Store. I'm your host again, Travis Severance, live from almost Spring, Rochester, New York. It's pretty wet out here in the Millennium Game Studios, home of the largest game store in North America. So we're a pretty big deal. Big views on last content. We talked about Games Workshop. I was pleasantly surprised to hear as many people that had commented that had been dealing with some of the stuff that I had and thought that my commentary was spot on. It was really nice to hear people talk about similar issues or similar things that they've dealt with. My hope when it comes to all this stuff and every piece of content that I'm doing is that there's some positive change that's made from it, whether it's from the publisher side of things or whether it's from the people watching here to take it home to their stores and to adjust things in a positive way. And even for the customers, I was blown away at my Star Wars Unlimited event this week that I played in. I had a number of customers that were like, man, I really like the content. You know, the whole point of this is to give you kind of an insight or get under the hood a little bit and show you some of the stuff that I deal with on the retail side of things for the store here. And hopefully that education works out in a way that it's positive and you have a better understanding of the reason why stores do things the way that they do, or maybe they do things differently and there's a certain reason for that. I'm certainly not an expert on every single store in the country, but this is how I do ours here. Subs are growing. We're pushing towards 500, which is great. I think a couple of weeks ago we were at like 2. So a lot of you guys are showing, and what I'm being told by my team that handles this is that my retention numbers are good, which means I got a bunch of repeat viewers. So I appreciate you guys all coming back to watch me week in and week out. That's awesome. It's good to hear. I like that positive feedback and I can see that in the numbers. So let's get into it. We got a really small topic today. We're just going to talk about how to open a game store. So I've got 25-ish minutes to be able to talk about that thing. So it should be a piece of cake. Based on the conversations that I've had with the distributors that I use, which I'll list those off later in the show, there's roughly 3,000 game stores in the country. Now, there's all kinds of splits when I say game store. That's people that are actively ordering from different distributors in North America. So they can be cafes, they can be board game stores, they can be card stores. My friend Rob runs a store that's just miniature games. He focuses exclusively on miniature games and paint and that sort of stuff. 3,000 stores in the country. Maybe it's a little bit less. I'm gonna try to focus on specifically the stuff that I'm competent in. I've never run a game cafe. I don't know anything about that. So this isn't how to open a game store / game cafe. There's plenty of intelligent people that are out there doing that. It feels like there's a real uptick in game store cafes. It's not something that I'm personally looking into because I just don't have the acumen in the food and drink space. And I don't have a partner that I trust that I would be able to bring in to do that kind of thing. So I'm going to keep it focused around game retail stores that sell board games, card games, role-playing games, miniature games, that sort of thing, and what we do here specifically. So I'm going to give some generic numbers, some round numbers that just are sort of guideposts. So this is going to be a broad topic. And what I might do is, as the show goes along, I might take some of these things that I talk about, depending on what the feedback is, and chisel them into specific shows for each of the different items that I talk about. We'll see what the viewership is on this, and we'll see if people want to actually hear about that. So I'm going to give you some napkin math, and I'm going to talk about some percentages. And essentially, this is kind of where your revenue dollar goes. There's a really good article. My buddy Gary at Black Diamond Games has a blog post, and these will be in the show notes too, and a couple of the other things that I mentioned as well. And he talks about where the money goes for a $100 board game. So if you purchase a $100 board game from him, he shows you to the penny exactly where that goes to him. Now, his numbers could have changed. I think the article's about 8 years old, give or take. But if you go to his blog, he'll show you on there very clearly where all that money goes. And while my numbers and my breakdown and stuff is not exactly the same or identical to his, we're in the same industry, we're selling the same stuff. He has different costs and stuff, and that's the reason why some of my percentages here are going to look a little bit differently. And if you add them all up on the top end, they're going to add to over 100%. So you can take and iterate that however you want and decide, okay, well, some of these things I got to tune back. But the way that I like to start is, if you're looking at what you're going to do when you want to try to start a game store, starting at the finish is what I always do. And I talk about that in a couple of different episodes here. So what I need to figure out how much money I need to live, because if I can't build a business that can afford me the ability to continue to live, there's no point in trying to build a business unless I'm independently wealthy or, I'm happy as a subsistence farmer on a yurt or something like that. Like, I have to actually make revenue. I have to actually be able to survive and live and buy groceries and afford vehicles and different things like that. So some napkin math, here's some percentages as far as like where your revenue dollar goes. Cost of goods is around 52%. I say around 52% because our store here specifically deals with used goods. We buy board games, we buy single cards, we buy collections and all kinds of weird oddities that we think we can turn around and we can sell more often than not, those are at a lower than a 52% cost, just based on the fact that we're taking on this used good and trying to move it into a space that makes us profit. Profit for your store, you should be looking at somewhere between 5 and 20%. 20% is kind of the golden number. So whatever model you have, you want to look at that as far as your profit goes. And I'll talk about what profit means. Profit doesn't mean that I extract that and I go to Aruba and I spend 20% of all the revenue that I generated this year in the store. No, that's typically invested into other ways. Payroll is typically 10 to 20%. Your rent is 10 to 15% typically. Utilities are 5 to 10%, give or take. So those will give you just some fractional numbers to try to take a look at. When you're going to go out and you're going to look at the way you're going to divide up that pie and take a look at what your revenue dollars are, and you can back the entire thing down to, this is how much I need to sell by the hour, if you want to get into the minutia of it, for the hours that my store is open and in operation in order to make all of those numbers work. So feel free to take a number, adjust those percentages, and see what it looks like in your area. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is that there's a whole list of things that people do wrong when they start their store. But a lot of times, one of the things that you have to do when you're starting your store, unless you're independently wealthy or you've got an extra $300,000 sitting around, you're going to have to go and you're going to have to get a loan. You're going to have to get a loan from a financial institution. And they can be really rough to deal with. So you're going to have to build a business plan. And building a business plan can be a pretty daunting task. I will tell you that the culmination of everything in a business plan for a brand new business that you haven't ever started is just 1/3 bullshit, 1/3 wizardry, and 1/3 voodoo. It's honestly you just throwing shit against the wall and hoping that your numbers are working. And it's you coming to a bank or a financial institution with a plan on how you think you're going to be successful doing this thing that you may or may not ever have done outside of being a customer for. It's a business plan that talks about how you're going to make revenue, projections, that sort of stuff, but it's really you going to a bank or a financial institution and selling yourself. You're going to get there with this piece of paper. You're going to talk about the location that's desirable to you. You're going to talk about median income of the people in the area, the potential for customers within a 90-mile radius or a 30-mile radius or a 60-mile radius, depending on what your metro is. At the end of the day, it's just you showing them a level of competency that you haven't just come into the bank and said, okay, I've decided that I want $300,000 from you. Please give me that money. I've got a nice smile on my face, right? And it does the other side of it too. They also look at your lack of competency when it comes to that, because if you don't have certain frameworks with regard to what it takes to run a business, they will be able to see that too, because they've got people that are pitching them ideas to lend you money all the time to start new businesses in the country. They're going to look at all kinds of things. Is your credit good? If your credit's bad, you don't have much of a shot here. Do you have some equity in your house? That helps. Do you have some cash in the bank? That helps. And a lot of times people are like, well, I would have all those things if they would just give me the money to be able to make those things. And it's sort of like the idea of, well, shouldn't the people with the worst credit score have the best interest rates because they have less of an ability to be able to pay? No, it doesn't work that way. With meritocracy and with the way that lending works in general, it's ability and intent. So what they're going to look at is they're going to look at the exposure. So if you have a ton of credit cards and there's no balances, but there's, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 out there, can you afford your lifestyle if you decide to max those credit cards? Do you have equity in your house? Have you moved a lot? What sort of job stability do you have? That sort of thing. So it's basically an audit for you as a person and what you have as far as how you've managed your finances and whether you can show them competency on that business plan or not. There's a ton of different places that you can find that will help you through the process. If you go online and you look up building a business plan, there's a bunch of websites out there that will give you the information on how to put something together for like that. When you open a game store, there's two different ways to do it. You can open the game store yourself from the ground, or you can buy out a current game store. There are hazards to both. I think there's a lot of opportunity for buying game stores right now because there's a lot of successful game stores that have owners that are getting a little bit older and they're looking to get out, and occasionally there's a good buying opportunity there. But what I would say is the framework and how a game store is run is a really, really tricky thing to try to navigate as far as understanding what the store is, what it has, and how it works. So it takes a really, really specific eye from an investment standpoint to be able to get inside of a game store, take a look at the inventory, the staff, the sales and stuff, and see if it's actually a business that's worth buying. Because more often than not, as somebody coming in to look at buying a business, which is what I did, I just bought the inventory. I didn't buy the business itself because I didn't want to deal with any potential tax liabilities that the old business would have had or any kind of financial obligations that they had. And, we had built in a right of first refusal. So if he decided that, his stepbrother was going to put in a $50,000 AC unit after we sold the business, then he couldn't step in and do that kind of thing. So they can both be really challenging. So as far as things that you're going to need, bare bones things that you have to have when you decide to get into this thing and you're going to walk this path, is you start with a business plan. You build a business plan off the data that you have available to you. It's hard to find, it's rough to do, but it's something that you have to do. And like I said, a lot of times it's just selling yourself to the bank. So things that you really need: professional services, the first thing that I can think of. You need a lawyer, you need a real estate agent, likely a customer or commercial real estate agent, you need an accountant. And those three things will sort of triangulate you on getting yourself into a spot that makes sense for you. So those things are critical. The lawyer is obviously going to deal with a bunch of your documents and things like that. Real estate agent is going to help you find something that's going to make you successful from a commercial standpoint and give you an opportunity there. And an accountant's going to be somebody that handles your taxes, because unless you're a trained accountant yourself, when you get into business, there's a whole bunch of laws and legalities that you have to follow, and you need somebody professional to handle that for you. Location you're going to look at. Parking is super, super important for us. Traffic, space. How much space do you have available? When we talk about space, and I'm going to just talk about myself, and I'm not going to say that there aren't stores out there that do it differently, and that's my caveat. I'm talking to you about either what I would do or what I'm currently doing. So right now, were I to open another location, I wouldn't open a location smaller than 5,000 square feet. Part of that is due to the fact that I want to make sure that I have a robust play space. I want to make sure that I can carry the lines that I want to carry and do it in a proper way. I want to give myself the highest opportunity to make maximum profit from that business and be successful based on all the ways that the business and the industry changes from time to time. Then you need to work with distribution. You're going to have a phone call with them and figure out how you're going to order product in. I work with PhD, I work with ACD, I work with Alliance, I work with GTS. If you go on Google, you can find all of those distributors. All of them are pretty good. Some of them are better than others, and some of them are better than others in different things. But essentially what they do is they take big giant boxes, they put them into smaller boxes, and they ship them to me so that it's easier for me, then I don't have to buy the big giant boxes. 80% of what I order today still comes from distribution. The other 20% comes from direct buying from the publishers themselves. I know a lot of people, and I thought this way myself when I first started out, is what I'm going to do before I get my retail location is I'm going to start an online website. And I'm going to start selling product through my online website first, and then I'm going to build my retail store from there. I'm going to tell you a secret about selling online. The people that do this, that sell online, can run circles around me as a brick and mortar store, as the largest in the country, as far as what they do and how they do it well. They've got margins and stuff that you're just never going to see. They've got an intelligence and an SEO reach that you don't have, and it's much, much harder to get into the space if you decide you're going to sell it out of your garage than trying to actually take a swing at a brick and mortar location and do it that way. Brick and mortar is a lot easier than selling it online as far as success goes long term, for sure. Then you got to get a point of sale. You have to have a point of sale system. This isn't napkins and we're not writing things down or old school cash registers. You need the ability to figure out what products you have. They have to scan into the system. You have to have the ability to run reports. You have to be able to order products, stuff like that. A couple of point of sales off the top of my head. So we use a point of sale called RMH. It's the most robust point of sale system that I've ever seen. And I've looked at a lot of them. There's reporting and there's functionality that they have on that I can't find anywhere else, and I can't live without as a business owner. Nobody else runs the reports the way that they do. They don't allow the ordering that I have from that. They do not have the functionality that I need to run my business. Now, if somebody were to come along and put that in front of me, I'd be more than happy to take a look at it. But for right now, RMH actually does more than I need it to do. That costs me about $1,400 a year for licensing for that. And then there's additional licensing based on the number of units that I have and the people that are running it. And there's some challenges that I have with the contract worker that comes in and fixes some stuff from time to time. There's also Shopify. There's also Lightspeed. If you go into some retail groups, they will give you a rundown of why they hate their current point of sale and why they'd like to do something else. But all of them have problems. The biggest problem that RMH has is, honestly, it doesn't have any e-commerce support. I can't immediately push my inventory up onto the internet without some sort of a bridge system or something like that handling me e-commerce. So someday maybe we'll see that. You got to get fixtures for your store. I use Franklin Fixtures. They're a company out of Tennessee. Their stuff is beautiful and they're amazing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for somebody right out of the gates. I think you should probably try to take a look at maybe some retail store closures in your area. See if you can get some fixtures put together that look nice, that you could clean up and maybe slap a coat of paint on and that kind of thing. There's constantly stores that are closing. So you have an opportunity, if you look locally, Facebook Marketplace, that kind of thing will give you some ideas on some leads. I'd also say the jankier the fixtures, the quicker you should probably look to replace them. You can have a store that doesn't have every single piece of furniture in the store matching up with each other. I think there's a little bit of flavor and there's a non-corporate aspect to that. When we started this location, I could have gone all with Franklin Fixtures. The fixtures that we got cost a little bit over $100K. I could have spent double that to finish out the rest of my store, but I just decided to use the older stuff, and it actually breaks up the space a little bit better. It adds a little bit of uniqueness to it. It doesn't look so plain, I guess. And part of that came from me going to a Barnes & Noble and taking a look at this massive Barnes & Noble in our area. That's a 2-story Barnes & Noble. And when I looked at all their fixtures and their furniture, there are like 30 different brands and 30 different styles. And actually, when it all doesn't match, it sort of matches. It looks like a theme. It's stuff that you can do, and you can move things around in a different way, because every piece of fixture doesn't necessarily work for every style of product as well. One of the things that people don't do enough of, and I'll talk about it in my top 7, is professional shows. If you haven't attended a professional show in the industry as a retailer, run and do it now. You should go as often as you possibly can. When I talk about professional shows, I'm talking about Gamma, I'm talking about Astra, I'm talking about the ACD Open House, I'm talking about the Alliance Open House, I'm talking about Trade Day at Gen Con, which actually for the first time ever, I will be presenting at the Trade Day at Gen Con this year. So if you're out in Indianapolis on that Tuesday, feel free to stop by and say hi. Then you have to work on your marketing. So social media presence is super important right now. As far as marketing and getting out there in your community and starting to work with other businesses and things like that with some collaborative efforts, start at your Chamber of Commerce. Work with your bank. When you go to do your grand opening, if your bank gives you a loan, a lot of times they'll make a really big deal of it, and your bank has a larger reach than what your business does. So if they do a big deal and there's a press release that your store is opening, then the local news channels will come by, they'll take a look at it, they'll shoot some video and stuff, and then people will start to discover you that way, and it doesn't cost you anything to do that. And then hiring. You got to hire some people. I would not start this place again, and I wouldn't do a 5,000 square foot store without some kind of an employee. So when you're looking at all of those things, and I broke payroll into there, take a look at having somebody there that's with you. I know people have started their businesses without that. I don't recommend it. I think it's really hard to do. I think it can be a really draining industry, and it's different when you have a couple of people in the trenches that aren't necessarily related to you doing the thing. I think it's easier on a balance thing, and I think it allows you to afford you the opportunity to be able to travel a little bit and do the professional stuff while you have somebody that's at home watching the shop. Oh, keep in mind too, we'll do an AMA at the end like we always do. That tends to be longer than the show sometimes, so I feel like you guys should put a tip jug out or something for me. But we're going to do 7 opportunities for failure along the way. So these are 7 things that I've either observed, I've dealt with myself, or I've seen from peers of mine, or I've watched throughout the history of being a retailer in this industry that have had some struggles, or maybe didn't put them on the right course, or caused them some challenges, or may cause them challenges right now. Number 7 is Spite Store. I would not open a Spite Store. Now, where does that reference come from? Well, season 10, episode 10 of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David's show, talks about a coffee company called Mocha Joe's that he goes into, and he goes in there and he gets pissed off one day, and the Mocha Joe's owner decides to call him an old nut.
That's cold coffee. That doesn't prove anything except that you're an old, bald nut.
Well, Larry decides what he's going to do is he's going to rent the location next to that coffee shop, and he's going to open Latte Larry, and he's just going to go into business against Mocha Joe's, and he's going to do all the things in his business that Mocha Joe just can't do. At the end of the episode, both of the businesses burned down, but I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've decided, you've looked around your local area and the 5 or 6 game stores, or the 1 game store, or the 2 game stores just suck, and the owner doesn't know what they're doing, and you're going to open up a store and you're going to do it that much better, I wish you well. What happens a lot of times is people don't realize you're actually going to split the baby. You're going to get in there, and there's a number of customers there, in all likelihood, that actually enjoy that store. They enjoy going in there. They like the owner. They like the employees. They shop there. They don't have the same ideas about the business that you do. So when you open your store, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to attract all of those customers. Part of the reason why their store might look the way that it does is because the area that they're in is economically depressed, or it's struggling, or there just isn't a market for it. So you could put up the beautiful Disneyland of all game stores. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a profit thing to do. And on top of that, now you have competition. So your competition is working against you, and it's half the market that's potentially available. Are there stores out there that have done that and been able to do it successfully? Yes, there are. I would look at that market and look at the opportunities inside of that market to be able to iterate on what's there, or something that's being underserved, and use that as your platform, rather than saying this idiot doesn't know how to do the things that he's doing, I'm going to run a store that way. Number 6 is I see store owners that only stock their store with things they like. I'm going to let you in on a secret. About 85% of the stuff that I sell, I don't care for at all. And it still sells. Because I don't want to tell people what's fun. I curate the product based on what I think are good, but I don't necessarily curate product based on what I think I'm going to enjoy or I like myself. It's easier to sell things you're passionate about, but it's also cutting off entire segments of the market that you don't have anything for, because you've decided arbitrarily that you're going to be the tastemaker. And while that is important as a business to be able to do that, to not throw easy dollars on your shelf, like having a box of Magic and having a box of Pokemon because you can't stand card games. It's just free money. Like, don't turn your back on things like that. So they just stock their store with stuff that they love. Well, they're only going to get customers that they love too. I want to take a different approach to it. I want to bring in as many customers as I can with as wide a range of product as possible to fit the needs of as many customers as I possibly can, because the likelihood of them going out and then having a conversation with their friends to say, hey, I went to this great store, they have this, why don't you come with me the next time and we'll take a look around? So stocking the things you like only is a poor decision to try to make. You're just going to cut yourself down on market opportunity. Number 5, and this is sort of 3 parts. No play space, not enough play space, or your play space is lodged in the middle of retail. I have seen all of those things. I think businesses can function that way. I don't think that they can function maximally that way. Our industry is constantly looking for unique value propositions, and what I mean by that is giving your customer an experience or an event or an opportunity to shop with you in a way that other retail stores don't. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not doing the same sort of model that another game store is, but you're doing something differently than what Home Goods is doing or what Walmart's doing or what Target's doing or any other place. Events are a big part of that. Events and having a play space to be able to showcase events, to be able to do pre-releases, to be able to show off different things, to run leagues, to run demos, to run paint and takes, all those different things. The play space is pretty critical, which is the reason why when I talk about the space that I would prefer to have if I were to open another game store today, I wouldn't start with less than 5,000 square feet. So no play space, not enough play space, or play space in the middle of retail. Play space in the middle of retail. I was watching a stream 2 weeks ago for a specific game, and I was looking at the store. The streaming was on the table, but there was a wide cut to the rest of the store, and where the tables were, there was a ring around product where product was on the wall and the tables were there. So anybody trying to shop in the middle of that event, you might as well take all of that retail and just cut it out. Well, the event was on a Saturday, which is likely going to be your most shopped day. So figuring out some way to make it so that there's a cutoff where your play space is divided from your retail space, or you have fixtures in a way where there's some division there, is super critical. You don't want the tournament players to feel like they're in the way of the customers. The customers are back there. They're not going to be able to get to that Games Workshop because they can't get around the tables and they don't want to say excuse me, and it just makes for a miserable shopping experience. There are displays that are wire racking displays that have little legs that are shaped like a T that you can put up to create a barrier that way. And then when you're not having tournaments, if you want to open that up to maybe some seasonal merchandise or that sort of thing, be it because you're trying to maximize your space, go for it. But it makes it for unshoppable experience. It's not a great experience for the tournament player, and it's easy for them to steal too if they want to. Everybody's bags and backpacks are there. They can take a unit off the wall and put it in the bag, and you have no idea. So from a security standpoint, be careful there. Number 4, population matters. My hometown of 2,200 people is not a place that I would open a game store for, nor would I open a game store that was the 61st game store in Apache Junction. There's more population there, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense to try to go into that market and try to compete. There's areas that you can take a look at what your metrics are, and median income is super important, and the age of the population is really important too. There's a lot of different places in Florida that I've looked at setting up game stores. The problem with it is the population age doesn't align with what I want that age range to be. There aren't enough children in the area. There aren't enough families in the area. There's a lot of retirees. It's a beautiful area. There's a ton of people that are there, but the opportunity for me to be able to attract those people to sell the goods in the width that I want to is just not there. So take a look at what your metrics are and decide that you're in a space where there's a good enough population to be able to support a game store, which 2,200 people is just not going to get there. And you don't want to cap your ability to be able to make revenue. Number 3 is know what your store is. What kind of store have you decided to make? If you're only familiar with TCGs and you don't know anything about board games and you don't know anything about role-playing games and you don't know anything about miniatures, you can build a card game store. And it's just card games, and it's just tables and chairs to run events for card games, and you have accessories, and maybe you sell some dice. That's fine. Know what your store is. Try to find a way where you can be the best at whatever that is in your area. So it might be really, really hard to be the best board game store in your area because there's 2 or 3 that really kick ass. But there's nobody that's carrying anything outside of D&D when it comes to role-playing. Well, owning the role-playing space can be good. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It doesn't take up a lot of dollars. It's pretty easy to show role-playing customers that you care about them, and there's a lot of money to be made on dice and accessories and that sort of thing, and those tables and chairs can fit role-playing groups just as well as they can fit Magic players. I promise, we do it every day. So number 3 is know your store. Number 2 is not enough professional travel. I will say this across the board when it comes to most game store owners. I feel pretty confident in saying that Most game store owners are not traveling enough professionally for their business to have their finger on the pulse of what's going on with the industry. They're either relying on their customers to tell them, they're relying on their own Google searches, they're looking at content creators and stuff like that. There is a giant difference between getting out of your store, going to shows that matter, talking to the publishers, having face-to-face interactions with them, looking at the product. It's valuable. I travel every month for the business for one reason or another, and I travel to shows constantly, and that's the only way for me to understand it and know what the actual market is and what it isn't. I wouldn't know that I needed to have Star Wars Unlimited on my shelf if I didn't go to PAX Unplugged and talk to them about the game itself. There's a whole ton of research that goes into it. There's also the idea of, setting up some professional relationships with the publishers as well as the other business owners, so that you start to develop a cadence of having those conversations so they know who you are, and then all sorts of opportunities can come up for that. So make sure you're doing professional travel, regardless of the size of your store. And the number one issue that I see with game stores in general is just not enough capital. They don't have enough cash flow to be able to lean into a new release that's a can't miss. They don't have enough capital to find something that they believe in to be able to order more than what they would do normally financially to get that windfall. When they do invest it on things that don't matter, or they don't reinvest the money the right way. When you're building this business, if you get your $300,000 that you need to start a business, 200,000, 300,000, obviously geography is gonna change that. If you open the doors and your shelves are full and you've got $100 in your register, you've done it wrong. You need a little bit of liquidity on the backside to be able to take care of your bills. Most of your distributors are gonna have you on COD, so you're gonna need to write that check and pay for those goods before you've actually sold them. So there's some of that comes into play. Making sure that after you have all that money, you've got a chunk of money that's gonna take care of at least 4 months of your fixed expenses before you think you're going to make $1. Take that as a broad strokes thing. If you want to be a little bit more relaxed, look at 6 months of kind of a cushion there to have that. I think it's super important there. And then honorable mention, like I said, and I mentioned it before, is people don't reinvest into their business the right way. They don't realize how important it is to take a look at your fixtures, take a look at your tables and chairs, put money back towards that. Take a look at what your shelves are, take a look at product lines and decide to get rid of those and bring in new product lines. Just leaning into that sort of thing, upgrading your staff, paying more, getting better candidates, that sort of thing. All those things are reinvestments into your business. And a lot of times the reinvestment is just, okay, I just took that money out of the business and now I can do whatever I want with it at home. For like the first 4 or 5 years that myself and my business partner owned this business, we made almost nothing. We made just enough to kind of get by, and all of the money that came in, we reinvested it into paying down our debt, looking at increasing what we had for product on the shelf, looking at increasing what we had for staff to be able to do a whole bunch of different things, and then we kind of go from there. So 4 resources that I want to mention that can help you out if you're going down this path that are a little wider than me. Gary Ray wrote a book called Friendly Local Game Store. You can find that on Amazon. There's a link at the bottom of the page. I wrote the foreword to that. It's a very sobering foreword. If you take a look at that book and you read through the first couple of pages, I'm basically saying, at the end of the day, your business is successful based on what you decide to do. You decided to open a game store. So when you start looking around and you start complaining about the way the industry is and the market is, and I can't handle distribution, and I can't believe the publishers are doing this, why are the customers coming in? You made the decision that you wanted to do this thing, so you're in it now. So take that responsibility and move that forward. There's the Game Store Retail Guide, which is written by a gentleman named Lloyd Brown. You can take a look at that. Same thing in the Amazon. It's a PDF format, I believe. Bare bones basics. It'll give you some stuff that'll help you along that path. There's a book called Why We Buy that's by Paco Underhill. It's mostly talking about merchandising and setting up your store, and it talks about signage, but it goes into the psychology of shopping. It's super important. The newest edition has an e-commerce part of it that goes into it as well. For retail groups, there's Opening a Tabletop Store. That's run by Lloyd Brown, who I talked about earlier. And then there's Game Industry Jobs. So if you're looking to get into the game industry and you're just messing around and saying, oh, I want to try this first and I want to do another thing, go take a look at the Game Industry Jobs Facebook page. So that's it for the show today. Next week, I think I'm going to talk about Magic. I know I teased that last week, but this was super important. We're going to have a conversation about Magic coming off of what I would call a very successful Cowboys and Thunder Junction, or whatever it's called. It was lovely. We did really, really well with that. We'll go right into the AMA, and stay tuned next week, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same bat channel. Thanks, everybody.